The direction Klara and the Sun came from was a completely different direction. It was the world of small children's books. And I literally had a little story for young children. Uh, there was an editor at Faber who kept encouraging me to write for children. And I thought, oh, I've got a little story here for very young children. Um, and that story is more or less the kernel of Klara and the Sun. But I ran this little children's story, which I thought would work very well with pictures and illustrations and stuff. Past my daughter, who's she's not a child. She was then in her mid-20s. It's Naomi Ishiguro, who's a novelist herself, and she was then working in an independent bookstore, and she stared at me and said, "Look, there's no way you can go anywhere near young children with that story. That's going to just traumatize them." So I thought, oh right, but I thought it was a rather good story. So I thought I'd use it in an adult book, and I had actually then quite separately and for its own sake, I've been interested in AI, gene editing. Those two areas had fascinated me, and I'd been attending conversations, with kind of experts, as the kind of the non-expert in the room, and conferences and things like this, where I was listening to a lot of that stuff, and I'd had conversations with actual kind of key leading people in that field, and I've been shown around their workplaces and things. So I had all that stuff going on anyway, and I thought, oh right, that could be the backdrop. But the novel wasn't essentially, it's not supposed to be my thoughts about, how AI, gene editing, all these things will impact on the world, but it's just kind of there in the background.
Really interested about this idea of how you like to take genre and play with it, and to try and do something different with each book. This book, I suppose, would fit in, you could say it was sort of science fiction, speculative fiction, something like that. But I think I get the sense that you're not a great respecter of genre, or you don't even really like the idea of genre definitions. You're more trying to find new ways of exploring consistent themes in your work. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that is fair. I don't really see many boundaries between the genres. Maybe if you're a bookseller, that you are more conscious of these things, because you have to put things in shelves, but as a writer, I don't really see these boundaries very much, and I take what I need. And I've actually been rather passionate. I've been a kind of fan of different genres and what the kind of worlds that they open up to me. So and actually, I mean, all right, I have to confess, I mean, it's also a kind of a ploy on my part, because actually I usually repeat myself quite a lot in my novels. Some novels are just kind of rewrites of the previous book, because I wanted to revisit that same terrain and explore it a little bit more, or slightly differently, or there was something not quite right about the last book and I wanted to do it again. But people don't really notice this very much, because I do it in a different genre or a different setting, and people think, oh, he's moved on, isn't he? He's quite brave. He keeps moving on. So it's a good disguise, because people are very literal minded. So, and so yes, I mean, it might look like Klara and the Sun is a companion book to Never Let Me Go, and it is in many ways, and there is a relationship between those two books. But the genre that I was really conscious of is the one I told you about, the one of the picture books for young children. That fascinated me, not just because of it gave me an idea for a kind of a narrator like that, a non-human narrator, which is very common in those kinds of books. You have teddy bears and soft toys and dolls, and animals as your protagonist. But but it's not just at that level. I find those books for children, the illustrations as much as the stories, quite poignant. You can see because you can see the wish on the part of the adults to shelter the children who'll be reading these books from what's coming up. So the world is presented as this kind of much kinder place. But at the same time, you can see a kind of tension there, because you can see that often the adults who've created that book don't want to lie to the children, and they feel a kind of need to drop little hints about the, particularly about sadness and death, or something dark that might be awaiting them, without really rubbing it in their faces. So you often see this in the drawings and in the stories themselves. So I wanted that, a lot of that, to go into Klara and the Sun. I wanted that spirit. I wanted that kind of small child's logic. I even, visually, I wanted the thing to have the atmosphere of those kind of illustrations. The bright sun, the field, and these big sky, the colors. And Klara, to some extent, has the understanding and the vision of a young child who doesn't understand very much about the world, but is learning really fast. I mean, that's how she is at the beginning. Then she starts to change. She learns more.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that, because I was going to ask about Clara's worldview, I suppose, or how she sees the world, because despite the sophistication of her as an object, that she is this incredibly sophisticated robot, her view of the world is incredibly naive at the beginning. She observes, she's watching human behavior. She doesn't quite understand human motivation. And as you say, through the book, she begins to learn more and more about how humans work and operate and communicate to each other. And was that simply born out of the fact that it was initially a sort of an idea for a children's book, or did it also allow you, I suppose, to take the reader themselves on a journey of discovery along with Klara?
I think the latter very much. I mean, my children's story was, it's just a children's story. It ended very quickly. When I saw that option of having the protagonist as an AI person, that it just opened all these doors for me. If you have an outsider narrator like that, paradoxically, it does allow you to focus very sharply on specific aspects of the human world. And it feels very natural. So it feels quite natural for Klara, because she's created to prevent teenagers from being lonely, becoming lonely. I mean, that's a commercial purpose. That's why people like her are manufactured. She sees everything, certainly initially, through the lens of human loneliness. She looks out of the shop window at the street going past, and she tries to decode it in terms of loneliness. Largely, she tries to spot loneliness, how people are trying to avoid loneliness. And when she goes to live with the family, and she realizes that there's kind of impending heartbreak and she in this family, and she wants to try and stop that. I mean, it becomes quite natural for her to ask questions like, so what does it mean to love? What do human beings mean when they say they love somebody? And if they lose that person is irreplaceable. I mean, what does that make sense? So having a narrator that is so outside, like her, I think is a way of actually really allowing us, both me and the readers, to can really focus in on some aspects of our lives, but from a fresh perspective.